We're going to be spending some time with you this morning, and before we get started, we wanted to first start out with thanking Vanessa. We're here remotely now. We were originally planned to be on campus, but as part of a Teaching Innovations grant that Vanessa was awarded, and she has done an amazing job of being resilient in trying to figure out how to use this to the best advantage for the theater students and for your campus. And so it's been fun to kind of work through some plans. And so we are grateful for Vanessa's resilience and tenacity, and we're excited to be here today.
Amen.
Before we get started, we wanted to give you guys a little bit of some ground rules for what to expect with this training event or this conversation. A lot of times with virtual trainings, it's really easy to sort of get to a very didactic and passive place. We're going to try to avoid that, given that this is on experiential learning. We're going to try to have this be very interactive and back and forth. So we will be asking some questions of you so that we get to know your campus and your needs a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Please feel free to interrupt us at any point in time. If either our tech is being weird, you have a question, we use something that you know, terminology that's not familiar to you, do not hesitate to interrupt us. And it's a small enough group, you can just do that verbally.
Please, yeah.
If you put something in the chat, we, one, are potentially likely to miss it because we're focused on other things. And two, we don't actually have a keyboard to answer you in our Zoom room. And so we'll have to answer you verbally anyway. We are recording this, so Vanessa's recording it on her end for those that can't be present today, or if there's any parts of the message that we cover today that would be helpful for other people in your program or administration, you have that as a resource to fall back on. We'll also be recording the other session that we're doing today as well, and we can talk about that more towards the end. Just checking my to-do list to make sure. Oh, the final thing is we do have some interference issues, and so periodically you'll see Daniel hop up and sprint down the hallway with the laptop. That's because when we're going to be sharing some video with you, we can't actually have the laptop in the same Zoom room as our other materials, or we get some terrible interference. So we'll have a few things like that that will be going on that may seem a little weird from your end. The final thing is, if I'm looking at you on the screen, I'm looking like this, but our camera is actually set off to the side. And so we'll try to remember to make eye contact with the camera, but sometimes I will look like I'm not looking at you, but it's because we're actually looking at you.
Yes,
so.
Please don't feel like you're being ignored. We're actually being very attentive and trying to make eye contact with the monitor.
So before we move any further, I would love to know who's on the call with us and what your background is and what you hope to get out of today.
Why don't I start, and then I'll pass it to someone else. I'll say someone else's name, and then if we follow that pattern, we can try to get everybody on the call. So I'm Vanessa Ballum. I'm the head of the acting program in theater and dance. I am looking forward to getting my students some training this week with Trajectory so that we can help to serve the university at large through simulation. I'm going to pass it to Freddie.
Hi, I'm Freddie Giesler. I'm the director of the Master of Social Work program here at ISU, and I use a lot of simulation in my classes, and I'm always looking for opportunities to use the theater department students to work with my students to help them be better clinicians.
Great.
I'll pass it to Tara Young.
Hi, my name is Tara Young, and I am also in the theater department. my focus for simulation is on the makeup and the reality of what the actors look like, and have worked with a lot of community members in Pocatello, the airport and fire department, police stations, and several places other than ISU to make simulations real. So I am very excited to listen from a different standpoint for today. So thank you for being here with us. And I'm going to pass it to Danny Moffett.
Hi, I'm Danny Moffett. I'm the program director for athletic training, and I want to use simulation. I've talked to Vanessa and Melody quite a bit about this, and I'm really excited to start a simulation program here on campus for our programs. So I will just pass it to Melody.
Thank you, Danny. Melody Weaver, I'm an assistant professor in the College of Nursing. I am a family nurse practitioner and teach. We do a lot. We bring our students on campus, and we do what we call an OSCE, or a standardized patient learning experience. So like other programs like social work, and Tara, this will fall to you to help Vanessa, I think, right? Because we like to have our patients look like they're supposed to look, right? So it's really a challenge when you're doing young adult, and our standardized patients that have been generous enough to come every semester are in their 70s, right? So for the students, there's a big disconnect. So I'm really looking forward to the fact that we are likely going to have to expand how much simulation we use in our program, just due to the lack of, or the paucity of clinical sites. And we're going to be in a lot of competition with ICOM, and we've got the PA there's just lots of things going on. So I'm excited to be working with Danny and Vanessa and moving forward with this. Let's see, how about I'll pass it to you, Kara.
Okay, hi, I'm Kara Esplin. I work at the College of Nursing. I'm the Associate Director, Undergraduate Studies.
Kara, we can't hear you very well.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm the Associate Director, Undergraduate Studies at the College of Nursing. I'm also a clinical assistant professor, and I deal a lot with fundamentals. I have a postmaster certificate in simulation. I'm a member of the Society of Simulation in Healthcare. And looking at simulation and assisting students in connecting the basic concept of patient care and utilizing simulation is one of my focus in the fundamental class. So I'm here just to see what's out there.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Kara, who do you want to pass it to?
Why don't we go to Christy?
Hi. So I'm Christy Crownhart. I'm also in the College of Nursing, so I'm glad Melody let me know about this today. I'm the DNP coordinator and also a clinical assistant professor, and Melody pretty much spelled out what our goals are, but we do have standardized intensives every semester. So thank you so much for having us here today. And let's pass it to Norman.
There, can you hear me? Yeah, Norm Schroeder Theater. This has sounded really interesting, so I'm tying in and seeing what I can learn. So you can teach an old dog new tricks. So.
How about Sarah?
Hi. So I'm the director of debate and the professor in the Department of Communication, Media, and Persuasion. And I just was interested in learning more about this. In some ways, debate is a simulation of policymaking, and I wanted to see what other approaches were out there.
Great.
Welcome.
So, Kara?
So we've heard from Kara. Can we go to John
Oh,
Grievous?
sorry.
That's
I
good.
didn't keep track. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm John Grievous, and I am one of the Associate Deans in the College of Arts and Letters, and I serve the Fine Arts and Humanities programs. So I'm here to support this and Vanessa and all of you, and I'm really excited to see the range of individuals here from health-related programs in arts and letters, as well as representatives from the health professions. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity for some great cross-campus collaboration. I'm glad we're doing this. Thanks to everybody.
Well said. Thank you.
How about Tara Ashley?
I'm Tara Ashley, and I'm in the social work department as well. I'm a field director, and I was curious if we could maybe adapt simulation learning if our students end up leaving field again this next semester or need clients or to practice doing assessments. So just wondering if that might work for us.
How about John Young? Maybe we don't have John. Oh, here he comes.
No, I'm here. I just hit the wrong button, unmuting. I'm John Young. I'm a relatively new faculty member in my third year teaching, and I'm really here in the Department of Communications, primarily teach the video production curriculum. And I'm just here to learn, more about teaching, effective teaching, new ideas.
Great. Welcome.
We go to
Is there anyone left to pass it to?
Deirdre?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm from the Department of Sociology, Social Work and Criminology. I'm trying to see if there's anything I can adapt for my juvenile delinquency courses.
Oh, cool.
Great. And we have one more. The name looks like Who Crail. I'm not sure who that is, but if you're with us, if you'd like to chime in and introduce yourself. Okay, I don't know who that is. Maybe they'll join, maybe they'll tell us a little bit later, but I think.
We hear from Christine Crownhart.
Yes, you did.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, Daniel and Dr. Cary, I think that's everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you for directing traffic there too, Vanessa. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that sets up a good flow for the next couple of exercises Absolutely. We do when we get ready for that. So by way of more complete introduction, so my name is Julie Cary. I am a veterinarian. I am a specialist surgeon in large animal. So most of my early career was focused on doing surgery on horses, camels, goats, that sort of thing. And then I became an accidental academic. So I came back to the university, or I came here to help out with the emergency and critical care service, and ended up sort of coming at a time where things were innovating and there was some opportunity, and have stayed. Over the time that I've been here, I have added a couple of educational credentials. So I have a degree in medical education now through the University of Dundee in Scotland. And I am the first practicing veterinarian with as a certified healthcare simulation educator. So we've been kind of at an interesting place. Last year was our very exciting news of getting accredited. All right, so Raylan's having some tech issues. So, so we've got some ideas, some things to share, and we're also looking forward to learning with and from you all as well. And I'm going to pass it to Daniel, and then we'll talk a little bit about our actual umbrella organization.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. And just kind of echoing what John was saying, what an amazing collection of people and resources that you have down at ISU. This is really an impressive group. And again, in terms of personnel and interest, you are very resource rich compared to some of the other programs that we're helping as well. So just know that starting off. So my name is Daniel, and I come at simulation from the side door of the theater. I have an acting degree from the University of Idaho, and then I went back to school after a bit of a professional acting career and got a degree in theatrical directing. All that time, I was doing these little role plays. I was hired and I was doing these little role plays on the side. I didn't know it was simulation. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was doing it pretty consistently, and I was really interested in it because I was finding both something that I was using my particular skills towards, but also I could see working with psychology students, with medical students, with first responders, all these things, the incredible degree of learner impact. And so again, it felt really good that I was contributing, but you could also really kind of see the results. And so now 8 years ago, which is amazing to me to say, I actually took this job at WSU and became the full-time simulated client coordinator up here. And part of what I was just talking about, just in terms of the sense of reward, is kind of explains a little bit about this idea of trajectory and how we've kind of come to this. Dr. Cary talked about her extra credentials as a certified healthcare educator and medical educator. And those degrees, what we've collectively learned, both of us kind of arriving at simulation, but having, again, 8 and 10 years of experience under our belts, we recognized that we really wanted a mechanism by which we could spread the good news, so to speak. What we're really seeking to do through Trajectory is to plant sustainable simulation programs. We have international clients, but a lot of the people that we work with are kind of in the Northwest neighborhood, and that's really important because it allows for resource sharing and things like that, and so it's mutually beneficial. So that's kind of where Trajectory kind of came from. We say that we help learners experience their profession, and professionals learn from their experience, because we do work with a range of both novice and well-experienced learners as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about what Trajectory is and how we're teaming up with Vanessa specifically and the theater program down at ISU a little bit more. But that's a little bit of our trajectory, I suppose. Yeah.
Great. And throughout this, we'll talk about some of the projects that we've had and ideas and adventures we've gotten into. So
our hijinks, yeah, it's good.
So one of the things that I thought would be helpful to get started, again, to understand a little bit more about you and your program, and part of our goal with, as Daniel sort of alluded to, our goal with this conversation is as much to present some ideas as to get a conversation going, at your campus. So, there are case materials that, you may all come to realize could benefit all of your programs, ways of maybe approaching some interprofessional education opportunities or things like that may come out of these conversations. And so our intent is for us to maybe provide some catalyst and some ideas, as well as to share some of the things that we've done and some of the evidence through more stories and examples. What I thought might be helpful to start with is a question for you all to consider, and then as you feel comfortable sharing, that would be fantastic, and we can kind of keep the same process that Vanessa started with, one person sharing and then moving on. And that question is, what are your greatest aspirations for your learners? So your learner population, when you think about like your really big vision, what are you really trying to accomplish? What are the things that would, at the end of your career, you feel like, okay, I did what I set out to do? What does that look like? So I'm going to give you, we'll take a full minute to let you guys think on that, jot some ideas down, and then I'd love for those that feel comfortable sharing to give some ideas of what your aspirations are for your learners.
For us, let me put my video on. For us in simulation, with the fundamentals, my goal is that the students will be comfortable in their skill sets and that they can know that they are safe, that they have the knowledge base and the practical ability to apply it to patient care, but then to also understand what might be possible outcomes and communication that they have with their students, with their patients, excuse me.
Great, thanks.
I'll jump in. This is Vanessa. For the theater students, often I have students in my office asking me if theater is a viable profession for them and if they're going to be hired upon graduation and what that theater degree is worth. And yes, I get asked that a lot every semester. So for me, I feel like simulation is a way of taking the training and framing it in a new way that can help them, get this additional thing on their resumes. And also, I think, ensure that they can use those skills in a way that they can, formulate a career, as Daniel was saying. So not just through the lens of performing arts, but taking this training and finding this different application that can help me to answer that question for them in an even more positive fashion.
That's great. I'm glad that your students are asking those questions. Those are good too. That's excellent.
As an athletic trainer, I want my athletic training students, I want to know that they can be entry-level professionals and do their job. And this is going to sound horrible. I don't want them to kill anyone, kill or maim anyone. I want them to go out there and feel confident in themselves so that they can do their job and grow as professionals.
So I have a little different perspective, I think, as a debate coach. It's really about processing information and the ability to problem solve and employ critical thinking in the context of different informational scenarios. So I want them to be able to do research, process information, and come up with a reasonable outcome based on that. Also, to be strong public speakers and to be able to present in any kind of situation.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. Those are excellent.
I think in social work, we want to make sure that our students are competent, like athletic training, that they don't harm anyone. So some of our students are really excellent at their book knowledge, but they struggle a little bit when it comes to actually applying the things that they're learning in a classroom. And we have a role as gatekeepers to make sure that the students that graduate are competent and that they won't hurt anyone. So using simulation gives us a chance in the classroom to really see that the students are competent and that they can work with a variety of different clients with different challenges. Our program is focused on mental health and is a clinically oriented graduate program. And there's a high need for well-qualified social workers, especially in our region. So we want to make sure that when they graduate, they're ready to hit the ground running and that they will be able to grow into leaders and that they'll have the experience of practicing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Freddie.
This is Melody. For our nurse practitioner students in particular, it's important that they're also able, like Freddie says, be able to hit the ground running to some degree. And just as we've experienced with this whole issue with COVID, We've had to use different types of ways of teaching, and our students had to be removed from clinical experience. So how do we create an environment for them in the off chance that they're, again, not going to be allowed, whether it's by the university guidelines or the site where they may be assigned, not able to go into clinical to actually work with patients. So how do we create that realism for them in a variety of situations, whether it be patient management, time management, having the right having those difficult conversations with seriously ill patients, those kinds of things, so that we can at least expose them to those things that they're going to see out in the real world, and not be, and hopefully we've created an environment where they learn how to be safe.
This is great. They want a lot for their students.
Yeah.
This is good.
Well, you know, our students are going out, and as I tell them, the reason I'm pretty tough on them is I'm preparing them to take care of me.
Right.
So,
for my parents.
Right. So I want to know that they can do that.
Yeah.
And so
You are right. I think about that with my own daughter, that part of, you know, my interest and excitement about things like trajectory and simulation work is that I'm preparing the next like generation of professionals who are going to serve my daughter. And that's really important to me. So yeah, well said. Yeah.
Any other things you want us to add to the list?
I just really want to make sure that the things that we work on in the classroom apply to the kids as they pursue their careers, assuming they go into media creation based on the work that we've done. I just want to make sure that they look back and say, wow, that was really applicable. That wasn't just theoretical. It wasn't a waste of my time. You know, the real world's different. I'm really trying to focus them on things that they can continue to draw from 5 and 10 years into their careers. Say,
right.
Wow, we were really looking at the basics there, the foundations of these things that are kind of timeless.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think these are really important in the interest of cruising through, because we'll run the clock clear to the last moment, knowing us. It's important to think about our aspirations for our learners. And the other piece that I would ask you to think about over the course of while we're in this conversation together, and maybe even afterwards, are where are the areas that maybe you're falling short in attaining those aspirations. So, you know, Melody brought up her concern about clinical exposure. We're experiencing the same thing with our veterinary students. So we're very concerned about the fact that, you know, currently our teaching hospital is closed, and we're going to be bringing our 4th year students back into it after we gave them a chunk of mandatory vacation. And the whole situation is going to be different. So how do we ensure that they're getting good exposure in a tertiary care facility when they often don't get the right clinical exposure to begin with? So those are important things for us to be thinking about. I'll talk about it more as we get into some of the examples, but the thing that hooked me to staying in academics is my first year here. I was on the clinic floor. I was running the emergency and critical care service. I was predominantly working with 4th year students and residents and interns. And I saw a survey of our hiring practitioners talking about our students and our graduates. And where they were failing was in communication and surgery. And over time, I developed expertise in those 2 areas. I had the surgical expertise. I didn't have the expertise to teach it real well. I was a clinical practitioner and, you know, had been in private practice for quite a while before I came back to academics. But those two things to me seemed like they were low-hanging fruit and something that we should address. And we have, over the last 10 years, we have made those actually the thing that WSU graduates are known for. They're known for actually their strong communication skills and their solid surgical skills. And to the point where our liability insurance actually started to stabilize, and then our premiums declined for a little while because our new graduates weren't getting into trouble. And they directly looked at the schools that were seeing the lowest rates, and it was those of us that had put in formalized simulation training programs and really gotten aggressive about teaching these skills in a way that was going to be meaningful. So, you know, I think when we're trying to innovate and we're thinking about where we need to go, stopping and really thinking about where those challenges are for the whole profession or for our individuals. So now in veterinary medicine, we know we have a tremendous challenge with the resilience of our practitioners. That there's some evidence that maybe our mental health is not as robust as what we would hope it would be. So now we're starting to think about how do we take that deficit, that challenge, and build some simulation around that, and would that be beneficial for our students? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what we want to do from here is I'm going to talk a little bit about some terminology we use, so just so that we are on the same page. We will talk about simulated clients as an umbrella for patients and clients. So in our world, no animal walks in by itself, and they certainly don't bring in their own checkbook. And so we, have to extract that information and get permission to treat from the clients. When we've started working with human healthcare in a couple of different circumstances, we realized that terminology typically is standardized patients, but we've kind of gone to thinking about them all as simulated clients. We can talk about why we've gone away from standardized and tend to focus more on the simulated. That doesn't mean we don't develop standardized cases and standardized clients or patients, but we've kind of, the umbrella is simulated clients. We will talk about facilitators predominantly as coaches. So that's really how we think about them and the terminology we use. I tend to use those terms interchangeably. And then we'll talk about debrief, and feedback is part of the debrief process. So the debrief process is really the whole thing of making sense to it. So those of you that do simulation now, that's, the bread and butter, that's the key thing that makes our simulations work. For those of you that are new to simulation, that's a really key point. And in the literature has been the thing that actually drives learning the most. And so we'll talk about that. In part of our training with Vanessa, we'll actually be helping the theater students know what their role is in that debrief process and how they can really optimize working with their facilitator, their coach. I think what we'll do now is I'm going to send Daniel sprinting down the hall.
My laptop, here we go.
We have a short video that we want to show you that kind of encapsulates what it is that we do and why we do it. And it's on the non-technical side of things. And then we'll switch to a PowerPoint and go through some more examples. If there are education theory nerds in the group that want to talk about that stuff, we absolutely can. There's educational theory that underpins all of this, and I tend to make sure that I'm grounding all of the work I do in that. I know I tend to make sometimes people glaze over a little bit when I get really excited about it, so we're going to use predominantly stories and examples to really highlight those things, but if anybody wants to talk about that later or in the midst of this, feel free. What we're going to do is after we watch the video and we go through some examples, I'll stop along the way and feel free to interject some ideas, or if something resonates for you, bring that up, because I think it's useful in this cohort for you to have some ideas of what each other's thinking about. So if there's something that really hooks for you and is an idea that's working for somebody else, we can collaborate on those things and work together. And that usually helps our resources go further, and especially, administration buy-in sometimes is stronger if we've got multiple of us kind of working in the same direction. So I hope I talked long enough to give Daniel a chance to get to the other end of the hall and queued up.
And the public alike. Customers and patients enjoy better care. According to the evidence, effective communication skills are proven to benefit both professionals and the public alike. Customers and patients enjoy better care, leading to better outcomes, all with fewer complaints. Professionals likewise report higher levels of efficiency, productivity, and financial reward, all resulting in higher levels of job satisfaction and longevity. Whether we're seeking to improve our own critical thinking, customer relations, or collaboration with our teams, communication makes the difference. At Washington State University, the clinical communication program uses simulation, or experiential learning, to teach professional-grade communication skills. You might think of it as rehearsal for the real world.
I happened to be fortunate to start at the same time as we were developing this program. I got really excited about the fact that there was so much evidence to inform what we could be doing, both for the communication skills and how that would impact the public, be it patients, clients, customers. I was also really interested in the way that we could be more effective as educators using simulation. Communication skills are one of those things where you really need practice and coaching and somebody who really understands the end goal and the skills to get there to be able to change what we do.
It's almost like a muscle memory. You're practicing ways to say things, you're practicing ways to phrase certain things. That practice is really essential because you're doing it with a client that feels real, but it's not real.
I think there's a lot of value in having a trained simulated client because they're trained to be the real deal. They don't break character. To have that connection and to have that commitment, it's invaluable.
It's about listening and responding to what the learner needs and wants and what they're asking rather than what I know already. If the right question isn't asked or a question isn't asked in a certain way, I'm not wanting to volunteer information that I wouldn't necessarily offer anyway as a client.
Yeah, you're not being asked to get it much to a certain outcome. You really are going with whatever the learner's bringing into the room.
My role as a coach is to guide the students through their communication skills, take them through a simulated appointment, and really guide the process. Over the course of a couple of weeks even, you can see this transition. You see them becoming more confident as they learn new skills. You see them assisting their peers and giving advice and feedback, and that all helps build their confidence.
So the real value in simulation is that it can be practiced over and over again in a safe environment.
Simulation is also a remarkably flexible tool. It can be designed for any topic and conducted virtually anywhere.
I'm evangelical about simulation. I think it can help in so many different occupations and so many situations. It gets learners the chance to really practice real situations rather than dealing with just theory.
Learning how to work with people who were angry or sad or very, very frustrated or confused, that's the nature of our profession, and getting the chance to practice that here in school was challenging, but also really good at the same time.
So I'll note a couple of things about that particular video. The coach in that was actually a social worker in her previous life and then came to vet school. And she has really appreciated her social work background she's now an epidemiologist with the USDA. So those of you that help in that realm, that's amazing because She was fantastic. That was actually the B-roll footage. It was actually our preceptors. So those are practicing doctors, most of them WSU graduates, who take our fourth-year students in for their clinical rotations. And we realized that we were having a disconnect with our formal curriculum that we were teaching communication skills and our informal curriculum, what the house officers were doing, what practitioners were doing. And so we brought in, and I'll talk about the house officer training a little bit later, but we brought in a group of our preceptors to really help start to align that formal and informal curriculum. So they have a much stronger idea what the skill set is that the students are talking about, the terminology, so that we're sharing that terminology. And so they're actually role modeling more of the skills that we're trying to train our students to use. We offered that to our preceptors, and that was a 3-day workshop and was really well received. So when we're talking about non-technical skills, that's what actually was the major hook for me. And, we can look at other examples. So, the communication thing is really pretty straightforward. The thing about communication, and there's a lot of people in the audience that know this, or probably potentially everybody knows this, is that our own experience without seeing ourselves, without watching our videos played back for us, without getting coaching, without getting feedback, and even the response of the simulated client or the client, our ability to learn from our mistakes is actually really quite limited when it comes to communication skills. And so communication is really important that we use simulation to help train that. We could look at other things like leadership, conflict resolution. I've done some work with our house officers in those two areas where, the dynamics of our hospital are such that they have to find their own ways of influencing things. And so, learning how to do that and thinking about how you might respond to things. As Dr. Ackerman said, it's really having ways to say things or phrase things in your pocket to be able to pull those out. And you can play some of the what if game, but without really being put in those situations and seeing how you respond, you really don't know for sure.
Danny talked earlier about one of her aspirations is that her students don't hurt or kill anybody. Well, we also don't want them to kill their colleagues. So, it's kind of how you're working as a team, not just with your patients as well. So sometimes we do simulations about what happens, behind the scenes amongst work colleagues and things too. So.
Yep. All right, so moving to the next thing. Technical skills through repetition. This is probably the area that most people are most familiar with, using task trainers to be able to train things. So a couple of examples. We were really interested. So when I first started this work, I started looking at what the human literature was talking about and making July safer. So if when working in human healthcare, that when new interns and residents hit the floor, that is not exactly the safest time to be a patient. And so, there was a lot of effort in developing skill set and really reinforcing skill set before those interns were turned loose. And, I was able to use a lot of that literature to help convince my administration to let me buy a few models early on. Intubation, basically anytime you need to put a tube in something, there's great models. Alex and Alana are showing a model that we've created in-house that's really, really inexpensive to show how to do chest taps. So this is a dog that was hit by a car, and they've evaluated it and discovered its lung sounds were diminished to absent on one side, and we were teaching them triage in the realm of another area, and so they were able to decompress that patient. We've also developed an immersive anesthesia simulation event where we actually have an entire OR. We've now built a second one due to student demand, and it's now core. where our students go through a simulated case. Actually, they go through multiple simulated cases of anesthesia, and they respond to the monitoring. And we are working with mechanical engineering to actually develop models that have more realistic responses from a physiology standpoint. So technical skill is a really straightforward place to start working on simulation.
And because in the veterinary field, there's not a lot of existing models, we're still quite a bit behind, human medicine. A lot of the stuff that we create is created in-house. So we're very familiar with resource constraints and, telling really vivid stories kind of on a shoestring. So we got lots of hacks to share if anybody's ever interested. So
yeah, and I think this is a good example of where theater in developing models or helping with moulage is a really important element to that. To Melody's point, and a lot of you brought up, clinical exposure is really important, right? We want our students to have seen and experienced certain cases, either the common things that they need to do extremely well on the first day of graduation. We want them to have repeated exposure to that, assessment in that, and make sure that they really have that down. Or the more rare events where there could be significant challenges if they can't do it well. From a technical skill standpoint, I can think about tracheostomies. If my students call me and they say, I think I need to put a trach in this animal after they've graduated, they usually already needed to put a trach in, and they're often uncomfortable with that. So we really have highlighted being able to do a tracheostomy, even though they may only do 4 or 5, 6 in a year or in their career, depending on what they do. That's a critical skill. To the same degree, we want them to have that chance to think through their clinical reasoning, developing illness scripts, understanding, okay, this is what that kind of case looks like, and really have strong familiarity with case patterns when something is going as they would expect it and when it's not going as they would expect it, and having them regroup and really think through what's going on. One of the things that I am really interested in, and obviously human healthcare has spent a lot of time really thinking about, is the professional development side of things. So in terms of developing capacities, we know that the empathy scores in medical students declines over time. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. I suspect the same thing happens with veterinary students. And so what are the things that we need to do to actually help them with that? We also know that our incoming students already have lower empathy scores, or at least evidence of lower empathy scores, than they did maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So we've got to think about how do we develop that critical capacity in these students, and then how do we help them demonstrate that? Client and patient perspective is a critical aspect of that. Thinking about their professional roles and boundaries, so working in interprofessional education, what is the athletic trainer's role versus the social work role with this team or this circumstance? That sort of thing is an important thing to think about. We can explore ethics. So rather than saying, what would you do? We can put them in a situation and have them experience what they would do and maybe really think through that. And then simulation allows us to develop some reflection and lifelong learning, especially if we do a really good job with the debrief process and we make some sense of it. So I want to talk about the newspaper article that's featured in this slide. So this is some work that we do with Lewis and Clark State College. Daniel and the theater faculty down there worked together to come up with a case for an effort that the nursing college wanted to do, looking at disaster triage and the communication elements around that. So they wrote a case, and we use theater students for that. Daniel goes down and assists in the training, and I facilitate some training for the nursing faculty. And what we do is we have the students come in, and they work in pairs, and they work through what's going on with this particular patient. The context is not in a traditional nursing facility, it's in an evacuation center. And so they tend to come in with it with a very strong technical skills focus, right? So they want to know you know, what's going on with the person's heart rate, and they often miss some visual signs of what's going on with the student or with the patient from an anxiety standpoint. There's some background that they need, you know, that's beneficial for them to get. And eventually they learn that they've really got to slow down and think about their body posture and how they're going to get information, because this is a person that's easily overwhelmed. And once that we've worked them through, there's a coach with each pair of students, helps them make some sense of what's happening. Then we come together in a big group debrief, and I tend to lead that debrief. And what we talk about is what happened, what was important, why that information was important, what skills were important to get that. And they kind of can compartmentalize it to this context, and then I remind them of how that applies to all of their role as nurses. So, you know, the importance of potentially sitting down at the patient's bedside to have a really difficult conversation rather than standing over them, and reminding them just before they're getting ready to graduate of some of these critical elements. And it's been really interesting how well received it is. The students often have really strong responses to it. It's also been a way for the nursing program to really reconceive some of their other simulation exercises they do and how they make sense of those. And so it's been an interesting way for us to work with them.
Yeah.
Safety is critical. And what's really interesting to me is in healthcare and in aviation, among others, simulation came about for patient safety or for the public safety. I'm still working on getting veterinary medicine to understand that we need to think about safety. That doesn't mean that your animals are unsafe with veterinarians. That's just not the big paradigm that we think about things through. So when we think about things like flight simulators, either exploring or trying to avoid or understanding where medical errors come from, simulation is incredibly valuable there. We can recreate environments and figure out, why did we grab the wrong drug, or why did we miss that diagnosis? It can help us with quality assurance. So making sure that we've got certain elements in place, or if we're trying to help, say, the police force understand bias, we can put them in safe environments to recognize that they do have these biases, and then how do they develop coping strategies so that those things don't become an issue. So safety is a really important thing. I think this is one of the places where it's important for us to think about how we talk about return on investment and how we talk about getting society's trust and maintaining society's trust in our professions. And you know, this is certainly an area where we can think about that. We've been really struck as we've worked with simulation on the potential of simulation providing educational equity. So depending on our background, depending on what our experiences have been, we may have been raised in an environment where we can actively debate ideas, or we may be raised in an environment where debate is really not something we're comfortable with. And so simulation can help us kind of bring those things more equal from our backgrounds. One of the things that we did, we were working with Yakima Valley College. They invited us in to do a college-wide. We've been working with the technician program, the veterinary technician program, so the veterinary nursing program, in creating some communication cases and developing some simulation around that. And the college invited us back to do some work with the college as a whole to start to think about how to integrate simulation. And we were having a really robust conversation about where simulation belonged and what kind of cases they wanted to create. And something that kept coming up over and over was their advisors being frustrated and not knowing how to relate to their advisees. So if you look at this picture, you can see that the faculty is predominantly white. Their student population is not. They're predominantly first generation, Latinx, students or students from reasonably disadvantaged backgrounds quite often, where they didn't necessarily have the same worldview or the same understanding. So we came up with some simulation cases that actually started to help the advisors think through what their role was and why asking good questions was important before they actually started the advising process. So that we left them with the next stages being working with some actual students to develop some case material based on real experiences, and to work on using that to help train new advisors in having more open dialogues with their students so they could really understand where they're coming from and hopefully lead to greater success. We also know that for us, using simulations of assessments, so we do a lot of video trainings for our assessments or simulated student assessments, that actually helps me level the playing field with our evaluators so that we help make that more equal, that they recognize skills and aren't necessarily favoring one type of student over another just from their innate bias. We've also played a lot with some rare event preparations. So recently there's been a lot of conversation about germ games and what we learned from the germ games and how that might have helped us be more prepared for COVID-19. In veterinary medicine, we run a rotation here once a semester or once a year on veterinary planning and preparedness for natural disasters. And so we tend to work with a region and think about what their disasters are that they could expect. And then we run some simulations to actually help the students understand what their role is and get prepared for writing evacuation protocols and things like that. And then their capstone is we actually go to that area and we run a simulation based on the work that they've just done. So we've actually, sort of run them through a variety of simulations in preparation. So, bye, Danny.
Thank you, Danny.
The other thing that I find really fascinating is this idea of using simulation as exploration. And one of the things that sparked this was at an SSH meeting or IMSH meeting, when they were talking about moving into a new hospital and using simulation to troubleshoot the use of the space and to make sure they had it set up right, which got me thinking about using simulation to troubleshoot standard operating procedures, which we tend to struggle with a little bit in veterinary medicine, especially in production animal medicine, where we don't always get the buy-in that we think we should. If we use simulation, we may start to realize some of the reasons why we don't get that buy-in. This is a point for Melody to think about. We spent a lot of time thinking about telehealth this semester and actually running our students through more telehealth simulations. One, to prepare them for what's likely to be their reality on graduation. And two, because that's what we could do in the constraints of what we were working with. So we both sort of simultaneously explored the idea of telehealth and telesimulation and helped develop some skill set with our students around communication. We also use some organizational culture initiatives to look at this. So we like to play a lot with human-centered design and serious play. Sometimes we work on things like the little horses, or to remind us that we do an evacuation protocol for a major barn. We just take little plastic horses and work through the ideas there. So we can do a lot of things with exploring perspective, troubleshooting, that sort of thing. So in terms of what it takes to develop good simulation, there's a number of things that sort of are required for planning and design. The first and probably most critical thing for us to really think through is what our learning outcomes and objectives are, because that ultimately provides our compass, that reminds us where it is we're doing, and it provides us an understanding of how we need to design this simulation. So coupled with the context, so if I have a first-year veterinary student and our learning objectives are to work as a team, right? The way I design the simulation is going to be directly in service of those objectives. We need to make sure that we create a safe environment. And so for us, that meant that for the first several years, simulation was not an assessed activity. Now we do assessments now, and we'll talk about if there's interest in how we do assessments. But our students were motivated enough that we didn't really need to have that stick as part of it. We also need to make sure that we set ground rules in a way that make it a safe environment. And because these types of cases can sometimes really bring up strong emotions or reveal things that students didn't know they had. So back to the previous, that's 2 slides ago, where we had the person standing in the middle, the cartoon character with the empathy. That was a case that we had for our students, focus on communication and working through a client that was very frustrated with them, not really with them, but with the circumstances, and how to diffuse that. And what was interesting was we discovered, having replaced a traditionally male client situation, we put a female client in there for a while, that the student's response was actually much stronger than it had historically been. And I needed to help them unpack that and sort of explore whether the potential was there of them having some gender bias around that. And for us to have that conversation, we've been working together for a number of years so that we could have that conversation. If I had tried to have that conversation maybe with a group that I hadn't developed that kind of trust with, that might have been more difficult. So that safe environment is important for us to be able to really reflect and make sense of our own actions.
And also, just jumping back to that, really matches both the learning outcomes to the relationship level that you have with the learners, but also the experience level of the learners. So giving them, as the slide says, the building blocks to grow to meet a particular learning outcome or simulation challenge. So creating that in more of a series or sequential way that kind of what they learn in one helps them in the next and things like that. So there's a mapping process as well with content.
Simulation has to be responsive to learner inputs. So sometimes we'll create a simulation and an experience, but we don't necessarily have any sort of branching opportunities. That's really not simulation. The simulation needs to be able to, if I inject this drug and it is incorrect, the response from the monitoring equipment or the patient needs to be such that it is consistent with what that drug would have done. We need well-trained coaches and facilitators. And that's not a process that happens overnight. We continue to work with, we've got several programs where we've worked with their coaches and facilitators for the past 5 or 6 years, and we continue to build on those skills. I've got people that have been coaching with us for literally 12 years now, and we still build on their skill set. So I'm still building on my skill set. So it's a constant evolution.
Even that example from Lewis and Clark State College, the nursing simulation that you saw some images of, that's been a multi-year thing that we've added to. And then again, there's still coach training and still SC training or simulated client training every time. And those coaches who are returners, again, then they're kind of, they're relearning some of those skills, they're gearing up for that event, and then they're adding to their skill set. And it's also gathering new coaches as well. We're bringing new people into the fold, and then there's kind of a transitional process of handing off some of that to them as they're ready to take it and run with it. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about the sustainability aspect, but that's part of it in understanding that simulation. There's a training and a transitional period, and I think that's really important. Again, just to make sure that each crop of learners is getting our very best.
And then the piece about responsive and authentic role players, I think, is a really important one. So we're focused predominantly on the stuff that involves theater because we're sponsored by theater. We also feel like those human elements, even if you're using a mannequin, having somebody that's not a classmate as the family member adds a real level of authenticity that pulls the students in. To Melody's point, if you've got a case where it's supposed to be a 20-year-old and it's being played by a 60-year-old, that can create some cognitive dissonance. So the importance of moulage or having appropriate casting is really important. We also figured out, for us, a particular challenge is production animal medicine or large animal medicine, where that clientele tends to have a certain knowledge base that was hard to train into our clients. So we actually had to go out and find people with that knowledge base and an interest in participating in our program, because there were just certain elements that were hard for us to make it authentic for the students. Now, we have had some simulated clients that we've been able to train to that level, but it's been a long, arduous process. So there are certain case types that do require some background knowledge. There's others that don't. So most of our small animal cases don't necessarily require that people have had a lot of animal experience. It is vital that we have a solid and well-established process. And by that, I mean, we need to spend time in advance preparing. So for us, that means creating all of the materials. That means writing the cases, because we don't have a ready access to those. Some professions do have more canned and prepared cases, but we still need to evaluate those and think about them in the context of our own environments, and make sure that we have a plan in place for how we're going to make that as authentic as possible. We need to pre-brief our learners, and depending on their level, if they've been through a lot of simulation, the pre-brief probably is much shorter than if this is their first simulation event. It's also dependent on how much exposure they've had to the content beforehand. So for the communication cases, oftentimes my coaches are pre-briefing with the students maybe 20 minutes early on in the semester, where by the end of the semester and the students have been through a number of cases, their pre-brief may only be 5 minutes. Still, getting the student to thinking about what's going to be important for the case. Then we run the simulation. And an important thing to think about is we've seen some programs where they run the simulation through, they debrief it, they find the problems, but they don't necessarily let students go back and repeat or recreate some of those elements to see how they would respond. And in our minds, part of the debrief process is potentially even helping students revamp their approach and trying it again. Because the impact of seeing something actually work really effectively versus being told if you had done this, it would have worked effectively, are really quite different. And so sometimes I have to, again, going back to the learning objectives, I have to throw a few things out the window because I want to prioritize the high-end learning objectives, and maybe I don't get down to some of the lower ones, but I can focus on getting the students back in and trying that open-ended question or that summary statement to make sure they're on the same page with the client, and that really helps.
I was just going to add to that, going back to that nursing simulation that we've suggested a little bit, there was one instance that's just stuck in my mind that the nursing student, the simulated patient in that instance had an injured ankle, and the nursing student immediately dropped down and started removing the simulated client's shoe, and the simulated patient kind of immediately and instinctively kind of just reacted with shock and kind of withdrew. And that physical action, that moment of sincere surprise, really registered. We took a time out. We did a debrief right there. I'm getting ahead for the next bullet point to debrief, but we did a mini debrief within the simulation itself. Talked about it, got the simulated client's perspective, and unpacked what the learner was thinking and what their intention was. Then, instead of just saying, well, don't do that in the future, we said, okay, let's rewind. Let's go back and ask permission. How would we do that? And then we got to really compare and contrast the result of each. And then the simulated client was also able to vocalize what the difference for her was. And so that's something that that learner is never going to forget.
Yeah, so we're huge fans of timeouts and rewinds. They're not always the easiest thing to train coaches to use, but once they get comfortable with them, and especially if the simulated clients know how to work within that system of being able to reset themselves to a moment before and then compare and contrast two approaches, that's incredibly powerful for the debrief process. And in the debrief process, what we're doing is allowing the student, the learner, to unpack the experience, their emotional response, what they recall happening, what their colleagues observed, what we observed as far as the facilitator, and what the simulated client experienced. So, you know, we'll talk more about this with the theater students, but that's a really important lens to see it through, is what was it like to be in the client's shoes? How did your actions impact me? So it is important for both the learners and everybody involved with simulation to have a growth mindset, curiosity, and humility. So I cannot tell you how many times we have revamped our cases where they were good enough for the start of our program, but then as we all got better, those cases no longer held up, or those case materials no longer held up. So we're constantly evolving. I have not done any of my major lectures the same way twice, because I keep learning from what we can do and learning from other situations and bringing more advancements to how we approach it. So we're constantly growing, and we're trying to role model that for our students as well. And then I mentioned here appropriate technology. It is really easy to get hooked in by the very cool tech, and there is some amazing stuff, and we certainly have a lot of envy for some of the things that are available for human healthcare that aren't available for veterinary. On the same side, sometimes we get really amazing tech and we don't actually use it to its capacity, or we assume that because it was really expensive and it comes with a set of cases, that then our work is done and really all we do is deliver it, and that doesn't always result in amazing student outcomes. So sometimes our lower tech stuff is actually more valuable, and there was some really good work recently done in obstetrics where they're looking at dystocia manipulation outcomes and showing that maybe some of the really advanced models are not having as good outcomes when it comes to actually translating to the safety of women and babies. So there's some appropriate things for us to be thinking about when it comes to technology.
And that's why Dr. Cary listed learning outcomes and objectives first. That is the compass. Everything is kind of informed by that as well. So including the technology, choice of technology.
So program sustainability, I think, is an important thing to talk about. So I will say the first and probably most important thing is to get administration buy-in and clear and public support, which is why it's amazing that we've got some administrators on this conversation. Stuff can be grown from a grassroots, and we absolutely have grown a lot of our program from grassroots and getting students excited about it and having them storm the castle from a change in curriculum standpoint. But it has to have administrative support and clear and buy-in, or it's really hard to work through. Creativity is vital. So I think we're only limited in what we can really accomplish with simulation by our creativity. Now, that doesn't mean everything that could be simulated should be simulated, but our creativity is really important. We do need resources, and sometimes I think we need resources that are different than the ones that we tend to focus on. We need education and training, and then for most situations, we need ongoing professional development. And our experience is kind of that there's really a 5-year evolution to true sustainability with programs. Now you guys are starting at all kinds of levels of amazing preparation, and so it may be that we're in more of a situation to help out with a few ideas, and you take it and run with it. So each program is very different, but certainly it seems like for us it was a 5-year evolution to sustainability, and for the programs that we've helped, that seems to be the case as well.
Absolutely. Stop this, and we'll come back to us.
So I normally don't like to talk that long, but
it's true. She really actually hates it. So I'm very proud of you, Dr. Cary, for
So I'd love to know what's resonated for you, or what are some ideas that have come out of this conversation so far.
They're absorbing.
Mm-hmm.
This is Melody. I think for me, it resonates really well about creating a safe environment where students are able to make mistakes and be able to be supported in how to do better with them. I know that we in the past have done individual debrief. We give them the setup, they do the simulation, then we do an individual debrief. And then at the end of the day, we bring everybody together to identify things that were concerns or issues or very successful as a group. So everybody gets a chance, our students as well, to be able to tell us how they felt about it, right? And then how we could make it better. And we give them suggestions about how they could do better. But I really appreciated your comment about it's a visual dissonance that occurs that I'm looking forward to with, Vanessa's students and Tara's expertise. I think it was Tara, no? Yes, okay. In creating those, thanks Tara, in making these our patients or clients. In healthcare, we call them patients. In other disciplines, they call them clients. But to be more realistic, because then I think in that respect, it really decreases the stress level for the students, right? They're not trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So that's one of the things that I think is really important.
That's a great reflection, yeah. Yeah. Others?
So this is John Griebus here. Something that I thought about related to all of this is the role of grading or evaluation. I do lots of, I'm a communication professor, so I loved how many times you said communication. And it's so important when we're teaching communication skills to provide students the opportunity to put this into practice. But the other thing that I have found is really making sure through evaluation systems that they have freedom to fail without grade consequence. And in my group communication class, I let my students know that from the very beginning. And I know it's been dramatic, I think a pretty dramatic change in their willingness to just embrace the opportunity to give it a shot. Because I let them know that the reality is human beings are generally bad at being effective groups. I don't expect in a semester and a few lectures for them to become good. And I tell them I expect them to have pretty lousy group experiences, and that's okay, as long as they can reflect back on it and have a deeper, better, keener understanding of why it failed. And so anyway, that's just something that I think it's really important if we're going to translate this into an educational experience, that there have to be evaluation systems that support the kind of experimentation, play, opportunity to not perform well and to try again. So yeah, just something that I've learned over my years is I have to build that in, and I have to let the students know that in order for it to be a safe experience.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, John. And one of the things that we've done is Our assessments, and I use air quotes because they can completely bomb their assessment and still be fine as long as, you know, it makes sense why. Because I can give them content out of their comfort zone and their skill set can go from here to here pretty dramatically. But we do what's called a video review. So they record their final case. Everybody's got the same case in common. And then they sit down with a coach and a peer and they go through each other's videos and they get feedback and they talk about it. And again, we're fortunate we're in a pass-fail situation as a professional program at this point. But that's often cited as one of the most important parts of their training. Now, we can't do it at the beginning because they don't have enough foundation, but they really appreciate that approach. And so you're right, thinking about how do we prioritize the process of learning and the reflection and the things that we believe are really important over the immediate outcome, and being able to really demonstrate that to our students in how we assess them, how we process this stuff is going to make a difference how they come to it. Absolutely.
And I will add too, just with video review, it is really amazing when we get to that phase, to the assessment, how insightful the students are and how honest they are about their own performance, what they were trying, what was outside of their comfort zone, and basically kind of grading themselves, evaluating themselves. What's really cool about then is that that's transferable when they graduate. They're going in, they're meeting with their clients, they're meeting with their patients, and they're leaving that room and thinking, how did I do? How do I be objective in my self-evaluation? What would I do differently next time? So we're really kind of teaching those self-reflection and kind of lifelong learning skills where we're training curiosity and humility into our students through the process of the class that we teach.
I appreciated hearing about the preparation being really important, taking time to prepare. And also what I'm seeing is I love that we need to have a safe space for it, but I love the learning that can happen when you add a peer to the group, whether it's assessing it or analyzing it or in process. And so I think that you double your value of learning watching others fail or watching others experience that too. So I like the bigger learning that I'm beginning to see, as well as the preparation that it takes for that.
Yeah. And to that end, Tara, most of our surgery groups are 8 just by virtue of that's how big my groups have to be. And so when they go through some of their surgery simulations, and they're very simple, setting up surgery, getting ready for surgery, draping the patients, I have 4 that are allowed to, from the back, the back of the room, voice concerns, because I'm trying to teach them that that's appropriate in an OR. They can voice concerns, but they can't jump in and help because they're not the active participants, but they can be like, hey, hold up, wait, and so we integrate it that way. Our communication program, we tend to have 5 students in a group, and we try really hard to make sure they're as diverse a groups as we can, so that they bring sort of a difference in perspective to those conversations that really help it be more rich. So yeah, I think that's important.
And oftentimes when we're doing communication simulation, it tends to be a one-on-one, one simulated client and one student going at a particular time. So it's not like, to Dr. Cary's point, it's not 5 students on one simulated client. That's not what we mean. But what's nice about that is oftentimes the students will say, well, what you should have tried was X. And then Dr. Cary's good about saying, okay, show me that. And so it's like, if you're going to volunteer ideas, jump in there and let's see that experimented. Let's see that played out. So there is a kind of a great meeting of minds, and so we get a lot of material for the debrief within that kind of 1-hour session or however long we actually have to do it. It's lots of ideas.
Right, and I think the one time that I engaged in simulation learning, it was back in like 1997, but watching the video was as valuable, if not more valuable, and then using the video with new workers again was really helpful as well. Watching other people make mistakes and you thinking what you might do, and then when it's your turn, you try it differently and see what that experience is like. But I really like the idea of videotaping it, utilizing it, and then analyzing it and trying it again and again and again until it gets right. So that's fun.
Absolutely.
I would just like to say that I think it's a really powerful tool for people who are trained specifically in acting, because they can really wrap their head around that emotion or character from their point of view. But having been involved in so many of these simulations, for that person to stay in the moment and to really have that energy that would happen in a real life situation. I've seen students drop a patient, they didn't get hurt, or forget to put on gloves, or just turn white as a ghost because they've not been in a traumatic experience before in their training. And for the actor to be able to continue that emotion, I think takes a lot of real skill that is so paramount for the medical student to be able to experience before they're in a real life experience, you know. And so I think this is just absolutely necessary for training, and I think it's so effective.
And I think the other thing that's incredibly valuable is that same person can go to neutral while we do debrief and have a conversation, and they can reflect on, here's why that hit me this way, or here's how that hit me. And then I can look at the students and say, would you like to try something else? And they can try it immediately and get that immediate feedback. So they can hold that level when it's necessary. They can take it down to neutral when it's needed. Yes. And they can help. I think it's critical for empathy, because then it's not just that person was being a jerk, or that person was, just not responding to anything I said. There's a reason why. And if they can unpack that reason why, they can address it. And so then they start to realize there's a backstory. There's something going on here. If I try to figure out what's going on here, I may be more successful. So it decreases the villainization of the other person that we're working with too.
The myth of the difficult client versus a client in difficult circumstances. That's something that we really have the opportunity to unpack. And we all know that my perception of who I'm going to be working with before I even start working with them really informs what is going to happen. So I have to, check my own, mental state and bias. And so this is a really safe space, again, to unpack all those things. What you're talking about, even when we're doing teaching technical skills, there was that picture of that young woman sitting on top of the horse earlier in one of our slides. That was a kind of a rare event simulation. But we don't do that in isolation. You don't just look at those technical skills. We couch it within a story. We still had a simulated client. We still had a context and a circumstance. So we're teaching clinical skills, technical skills, but they're within this context of a story. So the students understand how we got here, and then how the decisions that they make are going to impact the patient or the client down the road. Yeah, there's some, simulation, I think, especially when we're adding in the communication aspects of simulation, really kind of takes out the abstraction to, I think it was John's point earlier. It's about the applicability. How is this going to impact the simulated client, in the hypothetical future, but that also then immediately translates to the learners thinking about, well, how's my conduct going to affect my real patients the day after, a week after, a year after? And I have to be thinking about those things as well. That is part of my responsibility as a professional in whatever career path I've elected to call my own. So, yeah.
Okay, we are running up to the end of the clock, as I said we would.
Always, you promised.
I did.
delivered.
I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to just talk through what the plan is from here and what the deliverables are for our time together.
Yeah. So with the kind of our time remaining, I'll give you like a little bit of a glimpse of what our next steps with this workshop series are. So ultimately, working with Vanessa, we've come up with a really cool and somewhat hybrid simulation training series. Again, because we're working through primarily with the theater students, we're coming at this from their lens. So basically what we're going to do is later today, we're actually going to offer a similar workshop to this, except exclusively or from the perspective of the theater student. What is simulation? Why is it important? Why do I need to know about it? How does it benefit me? How am I qualified to participate and even lead this industry in the future? Talking about that career viability. Okay, I'm gonna share a little bit of my story with some of those students as well. After that, we get the umbrella concept of what simulation is. We're going to put it into practice for Vanessa and some of the other kind of key stakeholders, Melody and Danny, who we've been working with a little bit. This is going to be an opportunity to have a first full exposure to the entire simulation process as Dr. Cary and I run it up here at WSU. What I'm going to be doing with Vanessa students is nothing that I don't do with my own simulated clients. From the onboarding process, so there's going to be a workshop called what I call Simprovisation. So basically taking, okay, you've been training as a performance artist, as an actor, but how do we translate that to the needs of simulation? How do we learn to be in the moment, however intense or specific that is, how authentic, and then to be able to step out of it and talk about it objectively? That's a very different skill set, and it's really important in terms of the debrief. So we'll do those kind of those skill workshops of translating the acting skills for simulation, and then we're actually going to move ahead and we're going to rehearse a scenario. We've got a couple of scenarios picked out. We're going to assign the students to scenarios. We're going to rehearse that particular scenario, and then we're going to do what we're calling a mock simulation. So it would be no fun for the students to be able to practice this, you know, if we're thinking about the theater, you rehearse a play that you're never going to perform. That's just unfair. That's just cruel. So what we're going to end up doing is the students are going to practice these scenarios. They're going to prepare themselves. And then Dr. Cary and I are going to role play both as the coach and as the learner. And we'll tie the students in to serve as the simulated clients for those scenarios. So they get to practice the role play itself, and then also giving me, as all the different learners, the different kind of characters, I would say, maybe of typical learners that we experience, how to give me feedback as well. So it's going to be, again, kind of a first in microcosm, but a full kind of exposure of the whole simulation process, from the onboarding to the actual rehearsal to the performance. And then us as key stakeholders will get together and say, okay, what did we learn from this? What is the next steps? How do we then start tagging back in with all the great people who are on this conversation and planning down the road and figuring out, well, where do you want to plant simulation in your respective courses, and how are we making those connections? So yeah, that's what the week looks like ahead of us, and we're really excited.
So we have run out of time and
Yep.
past time. So if you need to go, please feel free to do so. If you've got remaining questions, we're happy to stick around for a few minutes and answer any more questions. Otherwise, we very much appreciate you taking your time today to spend an hour and a half with us. Yeah. It was lovely meeting you all.
Thank you. And this will be recorded, so we encourage you to review it if you want, but also share it with people who maybe missed it but you think might be interested, or you on ISU campus, you want to connect with those people, you want to collaborate to create, you know, simulation between classes or between departments. If they missed it, this is a good teaser. So.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you, guys. I'll see you this evening. Well, I forget what time, but it's on my calendar.
4 o'clock, Melody. 4 o'clock.
Okay, I'll be there. Thank
5
you.
o'clock for us, Melody.
So Vanessa, we're on at 4?
I believe it's 5 o'clock for us.
Okay.
Double
So these are different breakout groups?
Yeah, Norm, I'll send you all of the details of when we're meeting with the students, and you're welcome to join any of them that you're available.
Yeah. It's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Let's see, is it just the 3 of us now?
Okay, so I don't think I need to share this video, or this image anymore.
It is. Okay, that was wonderful. That was just lovely, and I'm pleased with the buy-in that we had. Some of those people I had never met before. I'm really glad we had an associate dean there. I'm going to stop recording as well.